Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
Okay, so now, next up, we have Richard Anderson. I've known Richard for many years. I think I met him when I was a grad student, I think. So Richard, I think how many people have heard of Classroom Presenter or have used? Yeah. So most people here know Richard pretty well, if not personally, at least by his work, which has made a huge impact. So Richard got his PhD from Stanford, but ever since then, he's basically been at Washington, maybe a 1-year break in between, but has been at Washington University making a huge splash in the world of pen and computing. His Classroom Presenter, he started while combining with Microsoft and University of Washington, so he's always had a really close relationship with Washington. We're very lucky to have him because he is just down the street, essentially. So quite exciting. And Classroom Presenter, as I said before, has made a huge impact. I know in my research, it was stuff that inspired a lot of what we've done in my lab for many years after. It is a work that inspired probably many of you, and many of you have used it in the classroom as high school teachers and whatnot. So it's affected the lives of thousands, tens of thousands of students, instructors, maybe even hundreds of thousands at this point. Who knows? Over the years, I think that might be a reasonable number. So we're very excited. He's going to talk about the reflections on that, and we're going to try to encourage him to bring it back out alive probably at the end, because it has made such a huge impact, and it still is making an impact. People are still using it in their research. So without further ado.
Okay, thank you very much. That it's a tremendous honor to be speaking here, and I was certainly touched when I got the invitation and kind of the opportunity to kind of talk about this. And this is a very honest talk in the sense that I really did reflect about Classroom Presenter when I put it together, and kind of dredging through old notes and old PowerPoint and old email, discovering that a lot of things happened around Classroom Presenter, and there was a tremendous number of different inputs and ideas, and a very, very strong community that when I'm talking about it, even if I do talk about things in the first person, that Classroom Presenter represents work by a lot of different people, that I think there's a ton of very good ideas in Classroom Presenter because they came from my students, they came from collaborators, they came from random emails from elementary school teachers around the world. So this really is very broad. A lot of inputs made this happen. That when I used to give talks on educational technology, I would often start by with this slide. And this is something that one of my graduate students, Steve Wolfman, found somewhere. So Samuel May was an obscure historical figure, and in his memoirs, he has this great quote that in 1813, he attended a mathematical school, came across this incredible technology, a blackboard. And I think this is a fantastic quote because it captures so many important things. That one thing that it captures is we don't think of a blackboard as being technology, as educational technology, because it's so successful. The other thing I think is amazing about this quote and thinking about it with respect to education is, why is a blackboard so important for lecture and education? That what does it provide? That the blackboard, compared to not having one, is first a place that you can write information for a shared perspective on information. It's a way of providing an extended memory. It's a way of emphasizing. It's a way of stepping through a diagram and animating. So it provides the teacher a lot of affordances that were not available otherwise. And that's kind of what motivated us in our technology work, is thinking of how do we provide new technologies to use in the classroom. So Classroom Presenter is a very, very simple tool and idea. That what it is it's a way of putting ink on PowerPoint slides. That, that it has a couple views. It has an instructor view, a presentation view. It has a set of ink-based controls to make it easier for the instructor. We found the film strip view was a nice way of making slides available, giving instructor control. One idea that was suggested to us is, why don't we put notes only available to the instructor on the slides? So little cheat notes for the instructor. You know, some fact, some proof, something only appears to the instructor, a reminder on a point to make. So only appear for the instructor, don't appear on, on the public display. That in Classroom Presenter, we had three main scenarios for use of the tool. First, first for the instructor giving a lecture, just writing on the slides. Second, as a tool for a distributed classroom. So I am lecturing here, my slides are simultaneously shown in a classroom at, say, University of Washington. And a final scenario of integration of student devices with the instructor's device. So for Classroom Presenter, I actually have a very, very clear memory of where it came about. And you'll really understand the whole genesis of the idea. So 2001, I had a sabbatical from University of Washington. I had the opportunity to join the Learning Science Technology group here at Microsoft in Redmond in a distributed classroom project. And so the idea was to create a classroom that would link together multiple universities for computer science courses. That I had also been supervising our distance program at University of Washington in computer science and had to deal with the instructors, and my colleagues just hated to teach the distance courses. And so as formative work for the distributed classroom project, I sat down with colleagues, looked at their lectures, talked with them. And John Zahorian really articulated the problem of teaching the distance classes with the critique that it wasn't the distance class, it was the overly structured class that came about from having a strict PowerPoint lecture. And then I looked that in some of our classes we had an electronic whiteboard set up along with the slides, and noticed that whenever someone used the electronic whiteboard, it was in the context of the slide that was being used. And so, you know, based on that, it just seemed, let's try to integrate the slides with writing. And so it was a very, very clear genesis of the idea for Classroom Presenter as building a tool to use in a distributed classroom, allow the instructor to write on his or her PowerPoint slides to create flexibility in giving the lecture. That when I was at Microsoft in 2001, This was when the Tablet PC project at Microsoft was still under wraps. That there was a group inside one of the buildings at Microsoft that had started the Tablet PC, that they had some initial hardware, that it was actually very, very hard even to get a prototype device inside of Microsoft, that we felt very happy that we were able to get a single one of the tablets that we could work on for the project pre-release. So in terms of hardware available, that it was the initial Acer machines that were the first of the tablets that some of the older people in the room might remember. Devices such as the HP, what was the number on this? That TC1100.
Still a great machine.
And both the battery-powered one and the one with the active screen. So right in kind of when I first heard about the Tablet PC at Microsoft, that the idea just immediately came that we really should be having better experiences for inking on top of slides. So that led to the development of Classroom Presenter, developed inside the distributed classroom project. That the first version of Classroom Presenter, which demonstrates my UI design skills and actually demonstrated some of my programming skills as well. So we launched Classroom Presenter as part of Conference XP for the distributed classroom. That I spent a full year at Microsoft. That at my end of the year at Microsoft, I moved back to University of Washington to continue as in the computer science department. Microsoft did something very, very honorable at the end of my year. That, of course, when I signed on to do a sabbatical at Microsoft, I signed away everything for 6 generations. And Microsoft had absolutely no obligation to let Classroom Presenter outside of its organization. But when I left, the code for Classroom Presenter was released to the public, and in particular, it was released to me. So I've always appreciated that Microsoft did make kind of the appropriate step of making it possible to continue this project by supporting it, and also the legal steps. That back at University of Washington, we continued development of Classroom Presenter, that there were versions 2 and 3 that stepping between versions 2 and 3, that there were a lot of under-the-hood changes to get to version 3, that there were also quite a few things just in terms of usability and workflow that turned out to be very important, even though they weren't significant from a technical standpoint. So for example, in the initial version of Classroom Presenter, we had this deck builder tool. So the workflow was you took your PowerPoint, you ran it through deck builder, you got a CSD file, you loaded the CSD file into Classroom Presenter. And just the step of bringing deck builder inside of Classroom Presenter, so you were loading a PowerPoint, was a significant change in the workflow that really removed a big barrier for operation. Of course, in the computer science department, I couldn't really say my major research contribution this quarter has been moving Deck Builder inside of Classroom Presenter so we can load a .ppt. But it is the type of very, very significant change that was necessary just to move Classroom Presenter into something that was usable. So, I learned a tremendous amount in engineering and leading the project for quite a few years, and a lot of it is certainly things that people who are developing products, people who take a user-centered design in developing software understand, and it just can't be underestimated how much kind of the simple workflow was essential to getting Classroom Presenter to work. I think there were a lot of good ideas in Classroom Presenter, and I can comfortably say this because most of these ideas came from other people. And I've actually been frustrated that some of the ideas haven't been just picked up and run with by other products. So one that I just loved, and maybe Beth Simon suggested it. Beth gave a lot of good ideas to this project. Instructor notes. And our implementation of instructor notes was inside of PowerPoint to provide a macro that would allow you to tag regions as instructor only. And so then when slides were displayed, if you were in instructor mode, you could see them. If it's student mode or presentation mode, they would not show up. And I've got some colleagues who just relied on them extensively for putting cheat notes on their slides, that I found it really very useful from going from one instructor to another to be able to make these type of notes and make them visible where visible on the slide. Another idea that turned out to be very successful is the idea of being able to shrink the slide to provide some extra writing space. So this is an example of the display of a slide that's been shrunk. So the top part would initially display as a full slide. A button in Presenter shrinks it by 33%, providing this boundary to write on. And this is something that just fits with instructor practice. That you start writing on a slide, you need some extra space, and shrinking it, keeping the context, providing the extra writing. That we tried many more complicated ideas of extra space, but this simple idea has been just a very, very good match. Separating their instructor view from the display with easy-to-use ink controls, that I've always been flabbergasted at the difficulty of using the pen in PowerPoint and the challenge of changing the color of the pen in PowerPoint. That boggles my mind. But slide previews, that inside the film strip, moving the pen on top of the slides to get a blow-up view of what the slide is, just for facilitating looking ahead, that this is something we were able to get to work in a way that it's fairly smooth and does not trigger accidental slide transitions. Another final idea which has been very, very helpful is just to have a simple way of exporting all of the slides and ink in HTML. So after a lecture, it takes me just a couple minutes to put up my inked slides on the web, so you can review where the writing was on the slides. I remember quite often getting the comment of, if you post your slides with ink, why will students come to lecture? And I always thought that was kind of a ridiculous comment to make, as if the incremental value of coming to lecture was to see the ink going on the slides. And second, looking at the ink is only really useful if you were there. That almost always the ink put on the slides is really pretty incoherent. It might have been useful at the time. Seeing it will trigger what was going on in the classroom. But just seeing the ink is not that valuable outside of the entire context. So I see this type of archiving as really enhancing and strengthening experience to the people who are present, as opposed to this view that there's kind of a magical capture of the class that will short-circuit the process. There were also some bad ideas in Classroom Presenter. And the baddest idea of them all is one that I pushed for a long time and thought was brilliant at the time. And it was a really, what was I thinking idea. So in version 1 of Classroom Presenter, we had this idea of scrollable Mylar inspired by the overhead transparencies. And so as an instructor, I had spent a long time lecturing to write on this roll of transparencies, and then you'd turn the crank and move the writing up and create space below. And so the implementation in Classroom Presenter was fairly easy in that we just attached a scroll bar to the ink window so that you could move the scroll bar down to move the ink up. And I thought you'd keep some of it in the context of the slide and you would make more space. Any reactions as to why this idea might stink?
It implies that all of your content is linear, and so going forward, and you're just drawing.
So it certainly kind of violated how people used the ink.
The PowerPoint is not usually this linear.
Yeah, right. So
the bottom is the most valuable piece.
Right. The scrolling didn't fit. That when you scrolled up ink over, it would no longer align. It wouldn't fit. That there were also usability things that it was never clear whether you should scroll down to move the ink up or scroll up to move the ink up. The real disaster was just with respect to pen controls and seeing a lot of people having accidentally scrolling the ink. So the scroll feature was something that might be valuable in 2% of the instances, but it misfired far more often than that. So it's kind of an edge case that weakened the core scenarios. So this was dropped for the second version of Classroom Presenter. Another idea that we pursued was for integrating with student devices to be able to have students highlight areas of the slide of interest or make direct comments on the slides to draw attention to particular areas. And think this might be a way of making it easier for students to describe where they were having trouble, what points needed to be emphasized. That in classroom experiments, this also did not work particularly well. That one problem was just very, very hard for the instructor to react to this information. And then there was just the concern that it would be abused or distracting. That on the technical side, that one of the things that we struggled with for a long, long time was just the distribution of slides to student devices. And multicast we used multicast networking, which was not reliable, and spent tremendous time trying to get it to work. Another idea that I'm negative on, you can certainly disagree with this, is that we initially looked at integrating student note-taking with the classroom presentation. So students would have the slides on their devices, could take their notes on the slides. And after having experimented with it, developed it, that the linking the note-taking with the instructor did not seem to provide that much value, in my opinion. One of the things that we were very successful in Classroom Presenter, and Ruth, who's in the audience, Ruth, really helped on promoting the idea of student submissions. So we had various ideas of how do we get information back from the students into the presentation. And I'm very, very proud of what the mechanism eventually turned into. And there were a lot of internal discussions around the mechanics of this. So the broad idea is that we want to be able to have the students do active learning exercises in the classroom. And we want to get them back to the instructor, and the instructor to be able to then react to that in the class. So the way that student submissions works is instructor goes to a slide, and the slide appears on all of the student devices. The students then solve the exercise. They hit a submit button, which sends their solution to a slide deck on the instructor machine. The instructor then will receive all of the student submissions and then can review the student submissions visually and decide which ones to put on the public display. So first talk about the square, then talk about the circle. And in doing this, we did have this very structured way we thought of incorporating student devices into the classroom. And so it was around having active learning exercises built into the lecture, so give students time to reflect, get the information back to the instructor so the instructor can analyze and assess, and then give the instructor the ability to share the results and discuss them with the students. So this kind of three-part process. That from this, there were a wide number of faculty around the world that utilized this in the classroom. That here are a set of activities that I use in a senior algorithms class. So for example, in talking about topological sort, I give an example of a graph, and ask the students to number the nodes in topological order. And this is designed so that it actually is one that they cannot find a topological order because it has a cycle. So there's a discovery process in the exercise. They discover it's impossible. And for example, this particular student identified the problem and turned that in with their submission. Another type of exercise was to give a somewhat challenging problem to solve so that students could kind of compete to see who can find the best minimum cut in this graph. These exercises do take a moderate amount of work to come up with, of just hitting the right level of difficulty so that it's not too hard not to easy. So there's advanced work in preparation, that we have a fairly big archive of different classes, different approaches, different settings that have used the in-class activities for Classroom Presenter. So one of the things that we recognized quite early about Classroom Presenter is that we were actually going against the grain in a lot of the discussions of education and pedagogy. And it's doing something basically reactionary. So I've been to many education conferences and sat through big talks presented in PowerPoint about how awful lectures are as a pedagogical approach, and proposing flipped classrooms and many, many learner-centered approaches of dismissing the lecture as just being a outmoded, evil, useless, reactionary plot. Yet, lectures have quite a bit of resilience. And so we were really trying to make the lectures better. So thinking about how do we improve the lecture, and our view was improving the lecture, give the instructor more flexibility during the class, give the instructor structured ways of interacting with students. And so really thinking about how to improve the slide-based lecture. Another thing that put us with odds with a lot of people is we really did embrace PowerPoint as a tool and think about the really important positive aspects of PowerPoint and slide-based lectures. And in particular, PowerPoint is very significant because it provides a structured representation of a lecture, something that can be refined and iterated. And we're very excited about thinking about how do we put better content and better mechanisms for presentation in an educational setting into PowerPoint, and really viewing the slide artifact as a significant representation of educational content. So there were, of course, many challenges in the Classroom Presenter project, and challenges that led to a lot of time being spent quite unproductively. That the biggest technical challenge that we faced was we had this vision of distributing slides to 30 or 40 laptops in the classroom. And this was years ago with 802.11b. And if you just multiplied the size of the slide deck times the number of students and divided by the bandwidth, you would see that you might or might not get everything to everybody by the end of the hour. And so it was just this challenge of how do you get the bits to everybody, and spent a long time. We used multicast, where instead of sending one at a time to people with error correction, you would send the bits simultaneously to everybody. But in the wireless environment, some slides, some data would be lost. So slides would appear at different periodicities to people, and they would have this kind of blank slide that eventually content might or might not appear. The frustrating thing was just how much time we spent on this. And I guess this is kind of an example of a problem. If you wait long enough, it goes away. That for the robust versions of Classroom Presenter 3, it was just setting up point-to-point communication between the instructor's machine and each of the students, so individually sending the slides to each student worked out. Another pain point was keeping up with Office. And I guess just as kind of longevity of Classroom Presenter, of the versions of Office. So each change of Office would lead to some required changes of Classroom Presenter. Key thing in Classroom Presenter is we had to export the Office content into an image and send the images to the different machines. There was one of these versions of Office added a whole bunch of new fancy shadow fonts and glitter that was completely useless. But when these were exported, even something that just had a simple banner turned into a 100 megabyte slide image. So these type of things had to be fixed at each level. You know, there were bugs introduced. That the instructor notes actually stopped working with one of the versions, and we were never able to resurrect them, which I was very sorry about. So challenges in the software, that there are some challenges that have to be recognized about using something like Classroom Presenter in the classroom. And one is just this issue of cognitive load while lecturing. That it's well known that your IQ drops by 50% when standing up in front of people. and just kind of the simple affordances such as keeping track of what color the ink is on the pen and the slides. That I've seen interesting things such as people who have one slide which will be, let's say, dark blue background, and so they've chosen a yellow to be writing on, advance to the next slide, which actually has a white background, and keep writing on yellow. And yellow on white is not the best inking style. And I've seen this go on for kind of multiple slides before it's observed or noticed. And so just the cognitive issues that I think we've been quite successful in, having the big colored buttons and simple interface, but complicated things to do in an interface while lecturing are dangerous. Another thing that I've found to be really tragic is watching some people give a lecture from a tablet PC, and the lecture is given like this, with heads down facing the tablet, and so focusing on the writing, no eye contact. And I felt really guilty when I've watched people who sacrifice the audience interaction to just focus on the heads down writing.
Compare that to standing at a whiteboard or a blackboard with your back to the class.
Yes, I've certainly had instructors who I didn't see their eyes for 3 long proofs, yes. Yes, a point taken, Andy, thanks. That another lecture environment challenge is there's often this picture of some guy in a nice suit lecturing in front of a large lecture, holding a tablet PC, kind of writing neatly on the slides as he's walking across the audience. That, I'm often kind of shaky enough and nervous enough in class that the last thing I want to be doing is holding my laptop and just the fear of dropping it. So kind of the physical affordances are certainly an issue that come up. That in the course of Classroom Presenter, that we did lots of different things with the tool. One of the things that was really fun was spent a tremendous amount of time just studying the ink people wrote on slides. And I've watched many, many lectures that in our master's program we would record our lectures, so I would have both the lecture as well as the ink and stepping through them. That one of the key things about how people use ink in class is it's integrated into the slides. That often if you see the ink and the slides and weren't there, what are church booleans? That during the lecture, the ink is very important for identifying where the attention is, making key points, emphasizing points, but it is a very transitory experience. That we did a lot of analysis of diagrams done in lecture, and very often a diagram would have a series of phases. So draw a little, make a point, draw more, make a point. And so we started to experiment with ways of representing this. And if you're going to show an archive of the ink, I've come up with appropriate snapshots of when the different pictures occur. That it actually seemed to be quite easy just based on timing to figure out how to phase and draw the diagram. We spent lots of time understanding how different tick marks were used and for where things are, sometimes kind of linking to show things are connected and have this theory of different annotation marks. Another thing that is going to shock nobody, but there are a lot of mistakes on slides. And so just looking at the ink and classroom presenter and seeing where people correct mistakes on their slides. And seeing the number of these, that I thought a very useful tool and for an instructor would be just something that would allow the instructor to quickly review the slides after lecture to then make updates to the slides for the next time the course was offered. That I think it's a good bet for all 6 of these mistakes. Next time the course is offered, they're going to be there again. And so thinking about how the inking can actually feed back into instructor review. Another kind of cool plaything that we did is experimented with different varieties of digital ink. That we never put these into the production versions of Classroom Presenter. Here's an ink that Craig Prince developed that allowed an illustration of how fast the pen was moving. Here's an effect that Craig developed, which allows you to see overlap and layering of the ink, just with a simple trick of having the main solid ink with a slight border. And it's actually an effect you see on the chalkboard, where you can see drawing new chalk on top of old chalk. That another boundary case that wasn't that important but was fun to play with was that if you're having multiple people write from different tablets, displaying them on a common screen, how do you overlap the ink? So if I'm drawing with a red pen, Jonathan is drawing with a blue pen, that we're drawing at the same time and trying to overlap them appropriately. And there are just funny things come up if you start. It's natural to draw ink in layers. So it's whatever layer is drawn on top wins. And so how do you get shared inking to do the right thing? Okay, so for Classroom Presenter, it was developed at University of Washington over quite a few years. Started with work at Microsoft, large number of student developers, both undergrads and graduate students. That I really do have to call out Fred Vidian. He's a staff programmer at University of Washington who has provided some continued maintenance on Classroom Presenter. And for example, he's the one that fixes Classroom Presenter when a new version of Office comes out and a new build needs to be made. So having him available for staff support. Here's something that I think is really cool. How many people can read this? How many people can see that they can't read it? This was just, since it's open source, and having random people saying, I'm teaching in Greece, can I localize it? And we actually had done the right Microsoft localization methodology, so it's just putting together a translation file. So there's a French version, a Portuguese version, a Greek version, a Taiwanese version, a Mandarin version. And so outside software developers, the community around Classroom Presenter has always been very, very significant in lots of ways, of just the people that have picked it up around the world. People got very excited about tablets and using Classroom Presenter as one of the ways of using tablets that I'd hear from people who had made extensions around the world, many different places. Certainly a number of very key advocates for the project. We had a number of workshops at University of Washington and Microsoft to bring together a Classroom Presenter Tablet PC community that, for me, it was actually incredibly valuable in getting and working with people at a very wide range of educational institutes around Classroom Presenter. That kind of in the research community, there's this kind of R1 community, but a tremendous amount of exciting innovation were happening at smaller schools, community colleges. And so, personally, it's very enriching, just the variety of educational institutions. You probably can't read this email right up at the top, that I started to communicate with someone at the University of Jos in Nigeria. And somehow he had ended up with a donation of HP tablets and a university in north central Nigeria. And even in 2012, 2013, he was still using the tablets. And for me, it seemed like, this guy, he's one of the last people still using these tablets. I've got to go see him. And I actually had a visit to Nigeria and had arranged to visit their university. Unfortunately, I got mail when I was in Nigeria saying, I'm sorry, university's on strike, not safe to come. So I missed out my opportunity to see what was going on in this University of Nigeria with Classroom Presenter and tablets. But just exciting to see kind of the range of adoption of technology. One thing that has been just essential for this type of enterprise has been the support that it's received. And this is not the obligatory kind of comment at the end of a talk, supported by blah, blah, and blah. That in this type of work, there is kind of an issue that it only happens if resources are made available. And there was a very substantial investment by Microsoft and Microsoft Research in tablets in education, and in me, that one cannot employ graduate students without money to pay for them. So it was the resources that HP also for years had a very generous tablet PC promotion program. So this type of work does not happen without the right financial structures. And so that just has to be recognized. Another thing that I'm incredibly proud of is how other people have taken advantage of Classroom Presenter, taken the early code base, even some people in this room, and have done amazing innovations on top of the code base. That Beth Simon is someone who I got to know around Classroom Presenter, that she really wanted to take Classroom Presenter and make it into a web-based tool via Ubiquitous Presenter, and did amazing things, a set of innovations that Kimberly's work, I think, is just amazing in going way beyond what we thought of rich interaction on the student side and then tying it into a review cycle, and really understanding how tablets captures people's actions and thinking and can have mechanisms for instructors understanding what's going on. So it's, I'm just very proud to see of kind of other people's innovation. I think that points to kind of the right way to think of technology in education, of how it allows innovative things that are going to strengthen the student-instructor interaction. Okay, so I stopped doing Classroom Presenter about 2008. That we had an abortive effort to start Classroom Presenter 4 in 2009. Kind of started writing some code, but did not follow through on that. And it's certainly very mixed feelings, because very exciting work in Classroom Presenter. We were doing a lot of interesting things. Kind of my one sentence description of kind of why I moved on was difficulty of continuing to do this work as part of a research enterprise. And one of the things that's been great about Classroom Presenter is a set of great graduate students that have done theses around Classroom Presenter. That Steve Wolfman, Craig Prince, Ruth Anderson, that they all did interesting things with the technology and education. But there's also a tremendous amount of the project of getting Classroom Presenter to work for Office 2016. That's not going to be a PhD thesis, we hope. So there are just inherent challenges in continuing this work under the guise of a research enterprise at a university. That I would certainly cut tremendous slack at University of Washington to do non-traditional research, and it was fortunately respected at University of Washington. But that is just a limitation of how the university setting is hard to do it. But in this kind of semi-open source community project, it also doesn't fit with a commercial enterprise as well. So there are challenges in getting the model right. In 2008, 2009, Microsoft's commitment to the enterprise was at best unclear. And then there were also resource problems that I was facing for keeping a set of software developers working on the project. I freely admit that I underestimated the importance of low-cost tablets. That I did not think that these low-cost tablets would be so successful as personally owned devices. So the 2003 vision for the project was that students would come to class, the vision was the instructor would be lecturing from a tablet slide deck style lecture, rich features to lecture with digital ink. But then all the students would have a range of personally owned wireless devices where they could interact with the lecture in different ways. That when we did the work around student submissions, that we had this cart of HP tablets. We would take them to class early, get all the slides transferred to the tablets, pass out the tablets. Students would do 1 or 2 or 3 exercises during class using these special tablets on their desktops. But that was not sustainable at all. That it was good for experimentation, but certainly not the overhead. That some schools had a mandate of uniform devices for all students, which maybe could make it work. But we really felt that the way it's going to work is that if people have these devices that they want to keep charged because they really want to be texting to their friends, and incidentally, they can use them for participating in the class. So we really wanted it to be based on student devices. We wanted the devices to be ubiquitous. We didn't want to have a single device used. We wanted to have a situation where we could count on content being distributed across the class seamlessly. And that was kind of a crazy vision in 2003, but absolutely feasible right now. So there's kind of the irony that the vision for Classroom Presenter could be implemented in 2015. And I've actually been kind of surprised that some of the ideas have not been picked up by Classroom Presenter, and that there have not been kind of commercial alternatives that put Classroom Presenter out of business. That throughout the project, I had kind of anticipated that there would be a clear commercial product that would pick up and fill in the space. And it's kind of surprised me that when I'm going to teach a class, pulling out Classroom Presenter is still what I want to do. And so just to conclude, this is a partial list of people who have been involved and supported the project. But this has been an exciting enterprise just because of the wide number of people that have contributed to this vision. So thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to ramble.
So we have very little time. We have one question we can ask. We have one single question. You're first.
Oh, I win. So more than a comment than a question. I mean, I'm from Cincinnati Country Day School. We were Tablet PC in 5th through 12th grade. We did use Classroom Presenter when you had it, and multicast did kill us.
Okay.
But we switched to Dino. Dino found us. So your vision, we've been doing that for the last 10 years. I want to let you know that it does exist, and you had a huge
Right, and I certainly give tons of credit for Dino, but they've always been kind of friends. And,
I just want to make sure you knew that. I'm a classroom teacher, computer science, math. You absolutely transformed the way that we're able to interact with kids, and we've been spreading the message for 10 years too, but it's still obscure, unfortunately.
Awesome.
So thank you.
All right, let's thank our speaker once again.